Mr. Chair, you are live.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the March 10th, 2022 regular meeting of the Financial Advisory Commission. We'll call the meeting to order at about 8:03 or so. And I see we have with us commission members Ed Meehan, Jim Cardillo, Frank Brown, Bob Burden, and Patrick Bannon. And Patrick, this is your first meeting, and welcome to you. Also, we have Alderwoman Tierney, Kim Moronsky from Finance Department, and I see Jody Dickinson, you have Finance Director, just joined us, and that is it for the moment. So with that, I sent out a draft agenda. If you all had an opportunity to review it, I'll either entertain any revisions or correction or a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Bob Burden to approve, seconded by Jim Cardillo.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Jody, good morning. Are you ready to give whatever report you have of what's going on in your finance department? Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped. Approval of minutes. I sent out draft minutes from February 10th, 2022 meeting, and I know that Jim Cardillo said he had a couple of questions. Alderwoman Tierney said she had a comment. So why don't we take Jim's question first, and then we'll go to Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you, Fred. First question, with regards to attendees, I'm not sure if Mr. Bannon was present for the February meeting. He's listed as an attendee.
That is correct.
And secondly, with regards to the classification of members of the city council as general speakers, is it more appropriate to refer to them as attendees as opposed to general speakers? General speakers gives me the impression that they're presenting, and I thought they were attendees.
They were attendees. They were not specifically invited attendees. I don't know what's more appropriate. I'll go with.
May I speak?
Thank you, Kim. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, let me address the first question. I received a report from the City of Annapolis TV station exactly who was in attendance, and therefore maybe he didn't have the audio, but I did record based on a written report I received from COA TV on who was in attendance at the meeting.
Kim, let me stop you for a second. Patrick, were you at the last meeting on February 10th?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so that answered that question, Jim?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, and the second question was related to general speakers. I was advised through consultation with the city clerk to categorize that section of the minutes as such. So I received specific guidance on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Alderwoman Tierney, you had some comments or something about the minutes?
Thank you, Chair, for indulging me. I just want to make sure a path forward and whether or not I need to do something on, there's not an item number, but it's on the second page where it says Mr. Meehan motion to recommend to the mayor and city council that city staff with assistance from professional consultants undertake an evaluation of the desirability, affordability, and impacts on recruitment and retention of altering pension and retirement benefit programs. It was seconded and carried on voice vote. I just want clarification on where does that go from here?
Well, where that went was, if you recall, I sent a letter to the city council, mayor and city council from the commission dealing with this issue. The letter had been drafted and circulated to the commission members. No objections or comments from commission members, so then I sent it. It was about a week later or so. The letter went to the city council.
Okay, so I got that letter.
Yes, you should have.
Okay. All right, and so,
Alderman Arnett, did you receive a letter? Yes, he's saying.
okay. And did the city manager, more importantly?
Yes,
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I received it and we're planning to talk to our consultant about that. And right now we're deep in the throes of the budget and labor negotiations. But as soon as we get some free time, us being Jody and I, we will take that up and reach out to Boomershine to see if or get a price quote from them to do that work.
Okay, thank you. And could I have that, what the city manager just said in the minutes? I just don't want to lose sight of this. So thank you very much.
okay, can we have that, that Alderwoman Tierney would like, city manager's comments reflected in the minutes? Okay, any other
Affirmative.
comments or questions about the minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So
Motion
moved.
made by Jim Cardillo, seconded by Frank Brown. Any further comments or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. So minutes are approved as presented. Thank you very much, and thank Jim for your comments, and Alderwoman Tierney, thank you as well. Moving right along, Finance Department. Jody, do you have any report as to what's going on in your Finance Department this month?
So we just finished our annual comprehensive financial report on Monday, got the opinion from the auditors, and we have a PDF of that, which we just widely distributed. I think everybody, I'm not sure if we got it to the fact, we did it to the audit committee. We sent it to the council, the mayor. I'll make sure that everybody on this call gets a copy of that.
Yeah,
It's good.
I know we haven't received it yet, so I appreciate
Yeah.
it. If you-
Yeah, it'll be online as well, and hopefully, eventually we'll have a few hard copies printed. We don't do very many of those anymore, but we'll have some here if anybody wants a physical copy of the report. So that's off our plate. We'll be working on the single audit now, and that's the original deadline for that was March 31, but we may have to get an extension for that because the auditors still have not given us a timeline of when they can finish that work. So the RFP for Audit Services is getting ready to go out. I did a final review of that and sent it to Brian. So that should be on the street soon. And we'll be looking at proposals probably in the May timeframe for the FY22 audit. As David said, we've got labor negotiations, budget meetings, budget processes, and the P3, and those have all been filling our calendars almost completely on a daily basis. And then always the continuing staffing issues. You know, have a procurement officer. We've made 2 offers in the last 6 or so months, and both candidates declined the offer. So the position's still open. The applications trickle in, but so far no new candidates to talk to. We have an open accounting position we were going to fill, but that offer fell through as well. And we have a budget analyst we brought in contractually to help Katie with the budget process. So those are the staffing issues. And that's it. Just very busy.
Okay, Jody, with respect to the budget, do you have any sense of, you or David, any sense of the timeline? And timeline, what I'm talking about is when you expect that the budget will get to the city council to be referred to fact for our usual review of the budget and final fee ordinance and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just so we can start thinking about and planning our meeting schedule.
So the budget will be introduced to council at its first meeting in April. I don't have my calendar up right now, but
Yeah,
that,
I've got that,
12th?
Jody.
Uh-huh.
I can review
You can
that.
go
So-
through that in the work session.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, any questions of Jody on her report? No? Okay, thank you. Mr. City Manager, I know you said you had to leave a little bit early, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
So I'll go ahead and review the budget timeline. The council actually passed a resolution to lay this out in great detail. So April 11th is the date that the mayor's budget is going to be introduced to the city council. 3 days later, so that's a Monday, 3 days later on Thursday, we're going to have a council work session to have a detailed discussion of what's in that budget. Answer questions, go over the budget book, all those types of things. So then it goes over to the finance committee. So April 15th through May 6th, the finance committee will be conducting their hearings on the budget. We haven't set up that schedule yet, or Alderwoman Tierney and I have not worked out that schedule yet for the departments to do their presentations, but we will do that. So then on May 6th, actually May 9th is the date that the finance committee submits their budget report to the full council. April 28th, which is while the budget hearings are still going on, we're going to have another council work session to talk about the CIP and the debt affordability presentation by Davenport. May 16th is the due date from the council members for budget amendments. And then May 26th, 10 days later, we're going to have another council work session to review all of those amendments that have been proposed by the council members. June 6th is the day that we do the full day council meeting to go over the budget and to consider all the amendments. That will start at 10 a.m. and typically goes into the evening. So that's a long day of budget discussions. And then a week later on June 13th is when we anticipate that the budget will be approved with all the amendments.
Pretty ambitious, David.
Yeah, that's similar to the schedule that we put together last year, and we were able to meet that schedule. So I think it's doable, but it's a lot of work. So
I'm sure. And I have full confidence that the team over there will come through. Let me ask this: is everything that you have in writing somewhere?
Yes.
Maybe somebody can maybe email it to the commission, just so we.
Yeah, it's a council resolution, so it lays out all of those dates.
I can
So
send
the-
it to Kim if that helps, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kim, I'll send you that schedule. Sorry to interrupt, but I know David's
Oh,
busy.
that's fine. And then Kim, if you could send it to the commission members, that'd be great. That way, I was listening, but I wasn't taking it all in, David. That way we can all kind of see it and process it at the same time. And our next meeting is April 14th, same day that you having the first work session. So we can talk at that time about when would be appropriate for the commission to schedule special meetings to review and be able to comment on the budget and the various ordinances and resolutions that go with it and maybe refer to us, as they are typically each year. So, Bob.
Yeah, Fred, and looking at the budget process here this year and us receiving the schedule here shortly on it, and in past years, it appeared that the fact and the finance committee of the city council worked on parallel lines, but there did not appear to be a level of communication between the two entities as the budget is being looked at. And I'm kind of wondering if it might not be appropriate this year to explore a line of communication here between FACT and the City Finance Committee, as we both take a look at this budget and start sharing our perceptions and thoughts, rather than having parallel tracks that at some point down the road, the finance committee comes to their set of decisions, and then we, as a fact, render an advisory opinion, and there hasn't been that communication ahead of time to get to that point.
Yeah, good point, Bob. Typically, the FAC makes its recommendations and observation to the full mayor and council, not directly to the finance committee, because the referral is from the full council to go back to the council. I certainly don't have a major problem in trying to coordinate with the finance committee if that's something that the finance committee would like to do. But on the other hand, I don't want to overburden the members of the FAC with a whole series of additional meetings that we don't usually undertake. My recollection is that we've typically done our budget and related ordinance and resolution reviews in over the course of 2 meetings, one a regular meeting, then a special meeting, and actually finalizing our recommendations in either another special or the following regular meeting. So that's 3 meetings, I think, at which the FAC will be considering the budget related issue. Do you have any thoughts, Bob, or have you given much thought to how you might suggest we try and coordinate that?
Well, my thought is that as both of us are looking at the budget, we more than likely are going to have some points of interest in the budget that we're going to be focusing on, or that we may have questions on, or we may feel require a little bit more deliberation than other parts of the budget. Obviously, I don't think we're going to get as much into the weeds of the budget as perhaps the finance committee will, because they're going to be interviewing the department heads and so forth and so on, where we're looking at it from perhaps a higher altitude level, if you will. But nonetheless, if there are certain issues that we are looking at, or that we may want to explore further, or that we may have some questions on, my thought is it'd be helpful to communicate to the finance committee that we're looking at these things, at least so that they have a heads up, not that we have to join them in meetings or have joint meetings or anything of that sort, but rather simply communicating to the finance committee areas that we may be looking at and that may be advising on, just so that the finance committee is aware of what our program of work is on our end of the budget, and given our schedule. And that's my thought process. Obviously, we wouldn't be rendering any advisory opinion to the finance committee. We would just be informing them of areas of the budget which we are giving particular attention to.
Bob, I think that's sound. Alderwoman Tierney, you're the chair of the finance committee, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just reading the code right now, and there's no limitation, in you doing what Bob just suggested. I'm just trying to think of the format where that could happen. I agree. There's City Manager Jarrell has his hand up, but I just want to say I do agree. I think there has been in the past sort of a linear process where it was the Finance Committee report followed by the FAC, where I think it would be more optimal if the two, were more dovetailed into similar concerns, and so a more productive review. So City Manager Jarrell might have he has his hand up.
Okay.
And Kim does.
Yeah, so I think what we've done in the past, at least as far as the CIP and the debt affordability, because I think you all are I think that's one of the areas that Bob, that you guys would be interested in, is that we had a joint, that council work session that we have when we present the CIP and have Davenport come in and present the debt affordability, that we make that a joint meeting the FAC and the city council. That's the full city council, but I think instead of having two separate presentations for the two bodies, it's more efficient. And it's efficient for the city council to hear your concerns and your comments as well, in my view. So that's at least one area that I think has been productive in the past that we should do again this year.
Thank you for that. Jody?
I also could suggest that while we're talking to departments throughout April and into May, that of course the FAC members can tune into those meetings. I don't know if all those meetings will be recorded or not. They will, I don't know if they're going to be on the virtual platform or not. I don't know when we're going to switch back over, but if they're on the virtual platform, they may be recorded so you can go watch them afterwards.
Okay.
And then get back to us with questions. That'll give you a more in-depth view of what's in each department's budget.
Okay, thank you. All right, so why don't we think about it? Alderwoman Tierney, why don't you also think about, a format that you think might work for the finance committee? And I don't think we have to make any decisions, before our next meeting, April 14th. But certainly, I would like to follow up on Bob's suggestion. I think it's a good one. So I think it could work for the benefit of the finance committee, the FAC, and ultimately the entire city council. So why don't we proceed along that path then? Bob, thanks for that suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything more on budget process from Jody or David? No? Okay. David, anything new with Resiliency Authority?
No, the county's still working on the, so there was an executive director that was selected. That was originally supposed to be a contract position, but they have decided, in order to make it more appealing to that individual, to make it a county position. So they're going through the legislation to do that. That should happen at any time. It seems like it's been going on for quite some time, but that's the status. They need to hire that executive director so they can start putting that organization together.
I got a question on that.
Yeah.
This Resiliency Authority is a nonprofit entity, is that correct? David?
I'm thinking what the right answer is for that. So it's similar to the other agencies that the county has that's affiliated with them. So it's not a separate nonprofit as such. It's like their economic development, other agencies where they have an executive director.
They may be called quasi-governmental agencies. They don't pay taxes. They are tax exempt, but because of their relationship to the government.
Yeah, but
Okay, so when this Resiliency Authority was put together with a contracted executive director, now shifting over to a county employee type position, I would assume that the organization of the authority is such that it would permit that type of change to occur. Obviously, given the legislative process, it has to go through the county council to be able to do that. But that would not affect the structure as originally envisioned then, correct? Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
no, that's fine, but just an observation, and that is, there are 3 county privatized agencies: workforce development, economic development, and community development services. And the directors, CEOs of each one of those is not a county employee. They are hired by the organizations themselves under contracts. So while this may be similar in terms of a privatized agency, although it hasn't existed before, I think it's a very different scenario in terms of this this organization. And I know it's not our call, it's not my call, but I'd be real weary of putting an executive director, CEO as a county employee in that type of organization, which is privately organized and privately managed. I'm hearing this for the first time, and I certainly haven't gone back through the organizational documents, but my recollection is that the board appoints an executive director / CEO. So I'm sitting here right now, I don't know whether or not there would be a need to revise the organizational documents, whether it's articles of incorporation or bylaws, but so I'm sure, and I would certainly hope that the county attorney's office and maybe even the city attorney are going to be looking at that issue. So anyway, we'll stay tuned, right, David?
Correct.
Okay. Any questions, any further questions or comments about the Resiliency Authority? Hearing none. Labor negotiations, I understand from city attorney's email to me that labor negotiations are going on. You all are meeting about weekly or so, and that's about all he could say or would say. Do you have anything else that you can add, David?
No, that's it. We're meeting with the unions. We have 3 separate groups. We have police, fire, and AFSCME. So meetings are going on with each of those groups separately. So yeah, that's where we stand.
Okay. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, I believe I saw the city attorney's short, brief email initially. I guess I thought he was going to be in attendance at this meeting. I guess he decided that it wasn't necessary, given from his perspective that really the fact has no role to play until after the fact. I was hoping the city attorney would be present, David, because I quite frankly would like to hear from the city attorney as to how he reconciles his position with what is stipulated in the code, referencing collective bargaining. Because quite frankly, this code, could have enumerated any other areas of responsibility if it had chosen to do so, but it specifically chose 2 areas to enumerate in the code. One involved collective bargaining, and the other involved, the public debt. It specifically mentioned those 2 things, and it said not limited to not only those 2 roles, but not limited to the role that we would play in either of those 2 areas. And I'm just curious as to how the city attorney reconciles his position with what's in the code. The fact is not asking for a seat at the table to be part of the negotiations. But I do think the fact needs to, be very clearly engaged from the standpoint of at least, knowing what the city's putting on the table and, what the labor unions have put on the table without getting into the nitty gritty of the negotiations. And then at that point, serving in an advisory capacity to the city outside the negotiating room where appropriate. And quite frankly, and we've been through, there are only 3 people sitting in chairs today at this meeting that were involved when this legislation was drafted back in 2009, I guess, 2008, 2009. And, we knew the reason that this language was put in there. And we did realize that at that point, when the city was going through some significant financial challenges, that these 2 areas, in large part, did have, significant implications as to how the city's financial situation was at that time. And to be able to provide a resource that would help guide the city, in future situations. And we've been through several negotiating rounds with the unions since the formation of the FACT. And in each case, the FACT has been sidelined on this till the very end, when, the parties reached across the table, shook hands with the idea that it's going to go to the city council, and the city council is just going to, put their stamp of approval on it and go forward. unless there's any significant or major problems that crop up. And I'm just not so sure that the fact can serve its advisory function as it was designed to serve when the fact was formed and this ordinance was passed. So that's, kind of my thoughts on this, and I felt it important that they be expressed.
And Bob, are you asking Kim to make sure your comments are reflected in the minutes?
Yes, I would, and I would like to see, what the city attorney's rationale is with his brief statement that I saw that, the fact has no role in this because of the, confidentiality involved in union negotiations. And I want to know how he reconciles that with the ordinance, that specifically gives us a role in this area. I'm not stipulating a role at the negotiating table, but I am, conveying that the fact has certainly should have a larger role than what it has experienced since our inception and previous union negotiations. And, the city attorney, should be able to outline or craft a structure, whereby the fact could have a meaningful role given the other concerns that exist, rather than just dismiss the fact, until everything's said and done, and we do get to review what the handshake was, and stuff like that. So there'd be some work on the part of the city attorney, but I think that there's an obligation there that he craft a proposed structure where the fact can reasonably engage in collective bargaining, as our role as an advisory, commission to, the mayor, the administration, and the city council.
Bob, thank you for your comment. I'll let the Alderwoman Tierney and Alderman Arnett. So first, Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you. And this might be catch up on my part, but when you refer to legislation, Bob, what is the ordinance that you're referring to that expands on your duty that's established in 2.48.110 that does read that, but not limited to the review of collective bargaining agreements prior to execution? Is there something that expands on that role that I'm not aware of? Is there, you mentioned an ordinance subsequent to this?
No, I'm not. I'm referring specifically to the ordinance, which states that these issues shall include, but not be limited to, the review of collective bargaining agreements prior to execution. Prior to execution begins at the very point where the city starts sitting down and thinking, okay, what are the issues that are important to us? And anticipating what are the issues that may be important to the union. I mean, that's prior to execution. So I think that the ordinance was crafted to be broad in that sense. And that is where my reasoning is derived from as I read this particular ordinance, that grants that latitude. And that's why I noted just a few moments ago that I think the city attorney, should be requested, to take a look at this ordinance and the facts rule and the language of the ordinance and craft a structure whereby the fact could engage in the review of the collective bargaining, agreements prior to execution, which I would interpret as being the process that leads up to execution, within reasonable limits, understanding the other issues of confidentiality around the bargaining table and stuff like that. But in the past, the fact has been relatively sidelined in all this to the very end. And I think in many ways, perhaps as some past, city council members have expressed concern about at what point are they engaged in the process. So anyhow.
And Alderman Arnett, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob is exactly correct. I was the co-sponsor along with Alderman Israel of the fact enabling legislation. And for a long time, I and other members of the council have chafed that we basically are given the union contract negotiated as a take it or leave it proposition. So the thinking that went into the enabling legislation was, okay, we understand there's confidentiality sensitivities all over the place, but we have the Financial Advisory Commission as a trusted outside body who could do the very things that you mentioned, Bob, be advised about the things that are being put on the table by both sides. No deeper role, than that, other than advice. Council, have you thought about this, or other jurisdictions are doing that? And what we didn't put in the legislation, I think, and maybe that's why nothing has happened, is I do think that these are very sensitive negotiations. I'm very sympathetic to the position that city manager and finance directors are in. And there needs to be some kind of a confidentiality statement. Fred, you'd probably be better to think about that kind of thing, something that protects the negotiation, both sides, but still allows an independent body that is ultimately advisory to the city council on the budget. And it has never happened. Usually the negotiations are either very long and protracted, or are done under extreme time constraints. I think it's always done under time constraints like we're probably under now. But it was very clearly our intent when we drafted the legislation that the FAC have a role, because the council could not.
Okay, other comments or questions? Ed,
Yeah, just very briefly, it sounds to me like Alderman Arnett has explained the intent behind that provision, which is consistent with what I thought this body was supposed to do when I was asked to join it. And I'd certainly agree with the sentiments that Bob expressed. I think what we're all getting at in this regard is that we'd like to be helpful. We understand that these are very, very sensitive matters. And it does sound like, as Bob suggested, maybe it goes back to the city attorney to work through a process where we can play a meaningful role. At this point, my perception is we have no meaningful role that we are playing. And I think we're all expressing that we're interested and willing in having that meaningful role. And I see the city attorney is with us now, and hopefully we'll pick up on the idea that what we're trying to do here is to be involved in the process in a way that we think is consistent with what the duties of this commission should be. So those are my observations, basically just joining in to express the desire to be of aid there.
okay, welcome, Mr. City Attorney. How are you?
Good morning, everybody.
At what point did you enter the discussion?
Well, I think you're on. I think you're on the labor negotiation status. I heard a few comments there. Yes, I heard a few comments there.
Yeah. Would you like to? Is there any additional background you want to rehash about? The perspective from FAC members that the FAC should have some sort of confidential review role during the process without being party to the bargaining table, to provide guidance and input to city staff on matters that the FAC believes are essentially critical to the financial well-being of the city? Or is your position that there's no role that the FAC should have until there's a final agreement and presented to the city council?
Well, including the FAC in discussions about financial implications of labor negotiations is entirely within the purview of the mayor and the city manager. should they decide to ask for your assistance, there's nothing that would prevent that. The code does make clear that the chief negotiator is the city manager. So the only thing I think in emails and discussions previous to this that I was just trying to make clear is that the facts obligation or responsibility in this regard is only in as much as allowed by those who negotiate the contract. You don't have an independent authorized review or input on this process. But if the chief negotiator decides that you would have some great assistance to the process, it is entirely within his management purview to allow that in any way he sees fit. From the Office of Law's perspective, our only concern is that the negotiations remain as confidential as possible. At this point, the parties have not considered exposing any part of the process to folks outside of the signed parties. And right now, the signed parties are the city through the city manager and the unions through their legal counsel and negotiating team leads. But I don't think that it's an issue if the city manager has some role for you to play in advising him as to what needs to be negotiated. So that's really where I stand on it.
Okay, thank you very much for that, city attorney. Anybody have any comments or questions regarding the city attorney's perspective on this?
Just one very brief observation, if I may, is and Bob touched on this earlier, is the reference in basically what I take to be our charter, that we are to have a role specifically in collective bargaining. Seems to me that gives us some duty and opportunity and a role that is independent of what the city manager may determine. Because if the city manager has the discretion to let us in or keep us out, as a city manager may independently and separately determine, then what's the point of that reference in the code to the fact having a role in collective bargaining? It seems inconsistent. So that's an area where it might be helpful to have a little further background to understand better. And look, to be very clear, all we're trying to do is be of assistance here. We do recognize the sensitivity of this, and we just want to make sure that we're doing what we have volunteered to do by being a part of the process.
Yeah, let me add this. The code is replete with things that are inconsistent. Duties inconsistent, positions inconsistent, charges out of the charter and the code inconsistent with practicality. For instance, if you were to take an independent view of this thing, the labor negotiations, at what point would that happen? And how would the parties be involved? What would the union say if they said, well, we don't want the fact talking to any of our people, right? What does it mean to be involved? Does it mean to talk to the other side, to be at the table negotiating? All of these things haven't been figured out. And I think that if it's going to take place, there needs to be some process that is considered and, at least based on what has been going on previously. At this point, we're here at this point, even with the facts along attachment to the city, discussing an issue that if it were something that was happening or should have happened years and years ago. So if there's no process, why are we discussing it now? I mean, if it's supposed to happen, why are we discussing it now? It should have been something you were already doing. So these things just pop up from time to time. I don't think that it's we can't answer it. We can solve it, but my point in the whole discussion was to say that we haven't solved it. We're just saying that input might be good for the city, but where would that happen? And how would the parties, the other parties specifically, adapt and adjust to it? And what are the rules of the road? So.
All right. Alderwoman Kearney, and then I have one comment.
Yeah, thank you for indulging me. I'm a stickler on code and I just want to make sure that we're all working off the same sheet of music. I hear about enabling legislation, but when I look at the code and the duties of FAC, it is code section 2.48.110 based on an ordinance that was adopted in March 22nd, 2010. I think if you indulge me, City Attorney, let's look at that code. And I think what we're disagreeing on is the language, and maybe we can get some legal advice on this while you're here. It said these issues shall include, but not be limited to, quote, the review of collective bargaining agreements, prior to execution. So when you distill that down, does that mean the actual agreement as presented, as negotiated, or does that infer the process?
Well, here's the issue. Once an agreement is struck, how do you undo it? And who undoes it? So if the code gives the city manager the chief negotiating authority, the council even has very little role in it after that agreement has been struck. So the Financial Advisory Commission gets the agreement and they don't like 5 provisions in it and recommends to the council that something be done about it. Do we open up the agreement, and how would we do that? So to me, the Financial Advisory Commission has maybe a role to play in the process of prior to signing, because you can look at financial implications of various things and provide assistance to the chief negotiator, thinking through certain scenarios. What happens if we move, if we increase COLAs? Would that involve a tax increase, and what would the citizens think of that? I think those are appropriate, but it's really on management to figure it out. I don't know how we would have a FAC input after the agreement is struck, because you can say what you want to say, but once the agreement is struck, I'm sure the unions would not feel too good about us going back into provisions and trying to open up negotiations. There may be a process where we can break that up and have some input prior to the agreement being struck. But I do think the chief negotiator, the city manager, has broad authority to take in information from a wide array of individuals as he thinks through certain scenarios. We'd have to ensure that those discussions were confidential and that individuals sign confidentiality agreements and things like that. But he has some authority to pull together a team to think through certain things. That's not a problem.
Okay. The way I see it could work is the city manager, in his discretion, could make a referral to the FAC. We are in labor negotiations, and here are 3 issues that have potentially financial implications for the city. Give me your input, your insights, your guidance, your advice on these 3 issues. FAC reviews. I'm not even suggesting FAC talk to the other side or anything like that. That's not something we would typically do. And then provide the city manager with whatever input we feel is appropriate based on the questions he's asked in our review, and then he can do with it as he wants. It would be one more piece of information, piece of the puzzle for him to consider as he's leading the city team through the actual negotiation process. That's how I see it. The potential it could work. Whether people want to do that or not is a very different question. So I do appreciate, hearing your comments about what meaningful role the fact could have if they're presented with a fait accompli, an agreement that's been negotiated, hands shook, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if the city council, has the authority to reject an agreement, but maybe it does. Maybe that's the ultimate. I don't think
It
so.
doesn't.
No, okay. I didn't think so. So you're right. It really is no meaningful, role unless there's something crafted during the process for some guidance and advice on financial matters. So anyway, all right. Yes, Bob first, and then David. David, I know you have to leave momentarily.
I need to check off. Yeah, unfortunately, I need to check off for my next meeting, and my apologies. I had let the chair know in advance that I had to check off, so now's the time.
All right, well, thank you, David, but David, you did hear this discussion, and I would ask you to take it to heart, okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Bob?
No, I was just going to say, and I'm sorry that David had to leave, but I certainly understand the demands on his schedule. But I was just going to say, I just don't want to leave it at this. I think we need to make a decision as to how we proceed on this issue that we've raised. From what I understand from the city attorney, this involves, the fact sitting down with the city manager and working out a structure of engagement, for the fact relative to collective bargaining, that addresses the role that the fact has as provided in code, and recognizing from what the city attorney's presentation was to us this morning as to, how the code should be read and interpreted in terms of the concept of our engagement in the collective bargaining process. So what are the next steps? From the Financial Advisory Commission's perspective, what are the next steps that we should engage in here? I would assume it's sitting down with the city manager. And if so, shall we go ahead and set up a time to be able to do that and continue this discussion?
My suggestion or thought for consideration by fact members is that I put together a brief memo to the city manager as a follow-up to our meeting this morning, and asking him to consider asking him to develop a process by which the fact can have some sort of meaningful input on financial matters involved in the collective bargaining negotiations prior to agreement being reached with the unions. Something to that effect, so that we're on record as asking for it, as opposed to just leaving it where I left it with him and take it to heart. And then, I think there's only so much we can do, but at least that will put us on record. Who did I see next? Frank, do you have your hand up?
So earlier, basically, you've touched on it. I was going to actually pose the question again to Alderman Arnett, since he co-sponsored it, to kind of elaborate on what the intent was, but I think we've already covered that. And I like the way the discussion is going, is in as much as that at the end of the day, basically, we need to work with the city manager prior to the finalization of any negotiation.
Okay, Ed, I saw your hand up.
Yes, yeah, thanks. Just very briefly, Fred, I know that this will come down to the language that you circulate, and we can comment later, but I would just like to say that based on everything that I've heard and understand here, I would not frame this as an ask as much as that the fact believes it does have a role and a responsibility, and we're not gonna, I wouldn't present it as a demand either, but I just wouldn't frame it as we are requesting a role, but rather saying that we believe we do have a role and that we would like to, work in the most cooperative manner to carry out that role. So it's going to be a little bit of wording there, but you see where I'm trying to straddle that fence.
I see. I just made a couple of notes. Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you. The question I see is, when does advisory cross the line into accountability in the final negotiation product? It's a question to the city attorney, because I see that that's what we're struggling with. Is there's a confidentiality situation where the agreements are underway, but then in an advisory role, you do have to be careful on not crossing. I mean, I learned this the other night at city council meeting. You have to be careful about crossing the line into accountability and having an impact on the final product. Could you elaborate on that legally, Mr. Lyles?
Well, I think that you cannot have a chief negotiator and then roles assigned to folks to have a role in negotiation when there's a chief negotiator. The chief negotiator is the chief negotiator. They make the final decisions. So anything coming to the chief negotiator would all be advice. It can't direct. So input would just be advice only anyway.
Okay.
If there's another code section that says there's a role, that role must by nature be advisory because there's been an assigned chief negotiator. Maybe we need to clean up the language, but I see that pretty clearly. Now, the question from a process standpoint is, at what point does the chief negotiator need that advice? And I think that can be worked out. I don't see any issues with that, but it is the chief negotiator deciding that. Why? Because there's a chief negotiator. The chief negotiator can turn a radio on and turn it off or not touch it if the chief negotiator decides. The only issue for me from a legal perspective would, and I was talking practical issues, but from a legal perspective is maintaining confidentiality. And I'm not sure we've gotten to that, because that's a real big issue in labor negotiations. If you know about labor negotiations, should anything leak out, you leave something at the kitchen table and a wife or child who's part of a group that's associated with a union gets a hold of stuff, you got to really be careful, because the city could be put in positions that we don't want to be in. So we've got to cover the confidentiality piece, make sure that everyone knows that they need to retain information in a way that does not get out. And I see everybody on this Zoom at home. And what you don't want to have labor negotiation documents in your house, right? For obvious reasons. So we've got to work through that, and I can help with that. The other thing is, anytime you discuss in a group, you want to be in executive session when you're discussing these issues with the city manager, as well as there needs to be a process to figure out what information you have access to from the Department of Finance that could be assisting to the city manager. And how do we get that to you in a way that is confidential and secure? So those things we can work out, but I'm just putting that in front of you as things that you must consider.
Well said, Mr. City Attorney. Other comments or questions? All right, so based on this discussion, I would entertain a motion from somebody directing the chair to prepare a communication to the city manager, requesting the city manager to develop a process by which the FAC can play an advisory role to the city manager in the ongoing collective bargaining negotiations. That's my suggestion for a motion. I'll entertain other suggestions if you want, but I think that's broad enough. And I heard the discussion, and I would circulate a draft, for review and comment.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I have another meeting to go to. I apologize. But I am available by cell and email should you have any other questions, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Fred?
Yeah.
Yeah, you used the word request, and I think Ed mentioned that there's probably a finer line that we need to navigate through without actually using the word request, that, the code does give us a responsibility in this particular area. And so the question is, how is that responsibility to be fulfilled? And working with the city manager as the chief negotiator.
I'm not sure. I think what I said was request the city manager to develop a process for us to be able to provide him with advisory guidance on financial matters during the course of the collective bargaining negotiation.
Well, I'll defer to Ed then, because Ed's comment I supported, from the standpoint that, the code does stipulate that the fact has a role in this function. So I'm just uncertain as to, the concept of using the word request. Maybe I'm getting tied up in semantics here. But Ed, did you want to chime in?
Something stronger than request, but less than demand.
Yeah.
Well, right, but I think I get where Fred is going. Is we're saying we have a role. What we're requesting of the city manager is that the city manager put together a process to implement that role. So we're not requesting a role, we're requesting a process. And we probably are being very precise now with the wording, but I think Fred can put it together and we can comment on it. I think we're all trying to get to the same place.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ed.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move that the chair draft a letter to the city manager reflecting those comments.
Second.
Thank you.
Motion made, seconded. Further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Okay, unanimously approved. I will take care of that. I'll try and do it today if possible, if not, tomorrow, and send it out to fact members for review and comment. And as we did with the last letter, I will ask that you respond only to me to avoid any potential open meeting issues with respect to contemporaneous communications back and forth. And then I will be the conduit for further communication. If I don't see any significant substantial material revisions to the letter, I'll finalize it and send it out and provide copies to commission members and to the chair of the finance committee, to the attendees here. So, okay, thank you for that. Jim Cardillo, anything from the audit committee this month?
Yes, good morning. 3 quick items. One, the audit committee is still seeking additional members. If you are familiar with anyone who wishes to serve on the audit committee, they should contact Hillary Raftovich with an application. Second, the audit committee at its last February meeting reviewed the quarterly performance measures as prepared by the department heads and the results therein. This is to be reviewed on a quarterly basis. The overall feel of the committee was that the city has a long way to go towards the compliance aspect of getting those quarterly reports back from department heads. And then finally, the audit committee is developing a risk assessment framework to determine areas of concern that the audit committee should be addressing both in this year and going forward.
Okay, any questions of Jim on the audit committee report? Alderman Arnett?
Find my mute button. So in terms of the quarterly reports, we did get back, we asked for a side-by-side comparison of the current performance measures versus the new performance measures that the contractor for the audit committee came up and advised and worked with staff. And I don't know whether you know this or not, Jim, but the contractor said that would be $650. So I said, hooray, let's go forward and do that comparison. I don't know where that is. Jody can probably tell us where that is in the works, but I think that comparison would be very helpful to the audit committee.
I agree. Thank you. The majority of the meeting spent on the performance measures was mostly addressing the state of compliance with the measures as originally drafted at the beginning of the fiscal year and what responses we were seeing on a quarterly basis through 2 quarters of work and which departments had completed up to 2 quarters of work. So.
Okay. Any other questions of the audit committee report? Hearing none, we'll move on. And with, and I apologize, I'll revert to item 4B3, Hillman Garage Concession Agreement Status Update. It's unfortunate that David had to leave, but he did tell me, that he had another commitment, several days ago. I think, as we all know, the City Council has approved the concept of the agreement, for the redevelopment of the Hillman Garage and the City Dock project. I sent you out several days ago the summary that was provided to the City Council regarding the details of the very, very, very complicated agreement. I know that some of us might have appreciated the opportunity to have weighed in at some point in time on the structure and details of these agreements, but that was not the process that was laid out. Does anybody, and I don't know if there's any meaningful role that we can or should play at this point in time. Bob.
Yeah, the horse is already out of the barn on this one, Fred. I'd agree with you on that. But I have a couple questions, and maybe Jody can answer them. First of all, what are the reasons for not engaging the fact on this consequential financial undertaking?
That's a difficult question. So first of all, this was done.
I'm sorry, Jody, it's a very
request.
simple question. Yeah,
Yes,
this is a very
no,
simple
not.
question.
It's very deep and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I don't know the culmination of the process. We went out for it wasn't an RFP, it was a request for information, a way to get competitive proposals on the idea of a P3, because this has been in the works for more than 2 years, I think, as far as trying to get the garage rebuilt, knowing that it would not be something the city could take on its own as a general obligation bond, and what were the other options that were out there. And they worked with an organization, I don't remember what their names were, on establishing the idea of doing a P3 arrangement with a concession payment coming to us. So then not only could we do the garage, but we would be able to do most of City Dock. And so the responses to the RFI came in, I think at least a year ago, and they chose the successful. There's only 2 responses. They chose the successor, and we've been working with them to work on the design and the terms of the agreement. We've been through a pre-development agreement. And all along, I know the council has been involved with talking about the the arrangement and the discussions. But in general, it is an agreement that is under the control of the administration. So technically wouldn't need council approval, but it's such a big effort that we wanted to get the council's approval to move forward, which is why we did the resolution recently. So as far as I don't recall any specific decision point where we said, whoa, we're not going to involve the FAC. And so you probably have to ask the city manager if there was any specific decision to exclude the FAC as far as advising on the terms. With what we're doing now with the agreement, we've got specialists involved. We've hired outside advisors, several, and sitting with us on the terms and trying to work out the terms to our best advantage. So, and I'm sure that doesn't answer your question specifically. Like I said, I don't know if there was any specific point where somebody said, should we or should we not? And somebody said no, but the administration has been trying to find a way to rebuild the Hillman garage and improve city docks. So,
well, I think the point that you raised, Jody, in finding a way, to do this, and this is a consequential undertaking. In essence, basically, this is a financial gambit, and I use the word gambit not as a pejorative term, but in the real, true definition of it, that the city is taking on a risk to achieve a perceived financial advantage, to construct the garage and to begin work on the city dock. Now, whether this is was a calculated risk, in this undertaking, I think is still open to question among some of us, at least, from my standpoint. But there are many moving parts. As I've read this, and I was engaged I observed the finance committee meeting a couple of weeks ago or a week or so ago. And as I look at this, when I look at, what's going on here, there are many moving parts to this, okay? And really, in essence, what it is to, draw a scenario, it's like a series of dominoes lined up back to back to back, okay? And if any part of this agreement falters, those dominoes are going to start falling all the way down the line. And the question is, it could present some financial consequences for the city that may have not been fully contemplated or determined, in the process leading up to this agreement. And that is my concern. I mean, when I came out of that meeting, the big question I had in my mind was that how long has this been going on for? Given the consequential nature of this, why wasn't the FAC engaged, during the process to be able to render any advisory role that we had with this? And yet, we weren't until the very end. And at that point, this is a fait accompli. I just think that, we could have had a role to play. It could have been a very constructive and positive role to play. But right now, as I said, the horse is out of the barn. And at some point down the road, I hope that this project is a success. But, when you look at the concession agreement itself, the idea going into this, it would yield $35 million, to the city. And then all of a sudden that went down to 16 million. Now it's back up to somewhere around 22 million. But nonetheless, that 35 million was to be used to help underwrite, the improvements at the city dock. Now, in my mind, I'm going back to a couple of years ago where Ross can address this. But when we were looking at what needed to be done with the city dock, if it was to be done well and have a long-term positive effect, that project could run up close to 50 million and could even go beyond that. And so even the 35 million wouldn't have given us, all the necessary resources to be able to do what we needed to do at the city dock, as contentious as that issue has been over the last decade, not to mention. And now here we're going into an effort where we're going to enter into an agreement where we're going to get $22 million. Okay, that's not going to be, fully what is needed to do what should be done at the city dock. The city's going to have to make some other financial arrangements. They say through grants or going into additional debt to do it, to be able to do the city dock. And then there are issues here with this agreement, and there are, some problematic areas that were brought up in the finance committee meeting. And I don't know what further discussion took place at the city council, before approval was given on those problematic issues. But, nonetheless, I felt that the fact had potentially a constructive role to play. But we were not given that opportunity on this consequential decision. So, and my apologies to you, Jody, for the initial interruption when you tried to explain this. I was out of line on that. I'm sorry. So,
Bob, thanks for your cogent comments as always. I think that a lesson that I've learned from this is that when we collectively or individually see something going on that we in the city that we believe may have significant financial implications, we speak up, not wait for somebody else to speak up and say, hey, fact, help us. And we speak up and say, hey, Mr. Mayor, Mr. City Manager, finance, whoever, we just read about X, Y, and Z, and before it gets too far down the road, is there any role that we as a fact can provide or should provide in providing you financial guidance? So certainly something I'm going to be sensitive to moving forward. I don't know whether Alderwoman Tierney or Alderman Arnett had their hands up first, but I think Alderman Arnett is being very visible there. So go ahead.
Thank you, and I'll be very quick. First of all, in fairness to the administration, they themselves did not get the consent agreement draft until Christmas Eve, and there was a lot of negotiation and change to it. The city council, the finance director is correct. The only thing the city council voted on was rather to proceed with the 3P or self-finance. But that really speaks to what Bob is bringing up. And I think it's a deficiency. We've had two things at this meeting that talk about a deficiency in the fact legislation. I've already made a note to work on it. One, because the agreement and all the information that was shared with the council was done in closed session because the information was proprietarily owned by the bidder. It did not belong to the city and therefore had to be done confidentially. I had to go into the city manager's office and review materials there, couldn't take them away. So, I mean, it was an unusual, it's not inappropriate, but it was an unusual process. It wasn't a regular RFP process. But I think that the thing that I'm taking away from this meeting is it's time to go back and review the enabling legislation for the fact. And I think confidentiality, as the city attorney mentioned, rules on confidentiality and rules about when and how the fact gets involved. The fact really was created, it was my intent at least, that you be this outside body that would be advisory, and from my perspective, to the city council, the administration too, but it was really to us because there's so many things. If you look at the code, as Alderman Tierney points out on the review of union contracts, the council has absolutely no role until the contract is fully negotiated. That's in section Title 332, 110. But we wanted somebody to have a role and do the very things that was mentioned earlier, which is to know what each body is putting on the table and find an advisory role, albeit in a very confidential circumstance. I think, again, the city attorney is correct. You can't have any of this stuff leaking out. These are highly sensitive and a lot of suspicion in those negotiations and would have been in this negotiation. So I agree with you, Fred. I think the fact can observe that there may be a role for us, and we should speak up, but also I think there's a duty on me or others in the council to go back and review the rules you're operating under and maybe refine them, make them more explicit, and also talk about the confidentiality purview that you need to operate under.
Thank you for those comments. Next, Alderwoman Tierney and then Jody.
Thank you. I think anyone that watched the city council vote saw my frustration. I think I only voted for it after my colleague Alderman Arnett framed it as basically a nothing burger. and I have to say that I think it was a totally unfair position to put the city council in, and basically saying, I'm giving authority to the city to sign a contract that I don't see, but you've given me an outline of where I have some risk worries about, but I can't ask the question because it's not in my purview to have anything to do with a contract that the city has with an entity. So there's a big problem there, and I supported, after watching. We were privy to 2 closed sessions in the 11th hour, where we did get more confidence on the financial framework, but that's not what we were voting on. We were voting to proceed on signing a contract, again, that we were not privy to or saw the language of, just an outline of. So what do you do in a position like that? You say, okay, is the risk covered? And I continually tried to ask that question at the city council meeting. If these sub-tier contractors bail out, is the city left with that risk? That's all we could do. I unfairly put the FAC in a position where I wanted their input, but we knew that time was the pressure. So it was just a unfortunate scenario. We were all under the gun that we knew that any future review would be a delay, and that delay was consequential. So I don't know the lessons learned. I know that the city was subject to a painful review, and yes, they didn't get the concession agreement until the 11 hours. So it's all an unfortunate scenario, but it was a learning curve for me on what our limits are as a city council. And as proxy to my constituents and my residents, it's very frustrating. And I don't know the answer. It is parallel. It is a similar situation to the union negotiations, this whole issue of confidentiality. But I think the timing of this and waiting and assuming that the council would just, let me be frank, rubber stamp this was very unfair. And I've publicly said that before, and I have to say it again.
Thank you, Alderwoman Tierney. Jody.
I just wanted to go back a little bit and talk about the timing of everything since we got the responses to the RFI and chose the successful one. Excuse me. And it's been going on and moving forward all along. It hasn't been, the only part that's been rushed is recently. We got the original submissions. In the summer, the successor did a feasibility study at which they told us that concession payment was dropping from 33 million to 16 million. That's where we were last summer, mainly due to assumptions on incoming parking revenue and future parking revenue. And they had a very thorough study done of parking demands and future parking demands done by Walker, which is a very notable consultant on parking trends. And so they could no longer support the 33 million. It was 16 million. But the structure of the basic deal was always the same. A big chunk of senior debt done on a tax exempt basis, and a second piece that's a subordinate debt of a smaller piece of money, the borrowing. So moving through the summer into fall is when we were working on permitting, finishing the design of Hillman, and getting the backing of the historic can't remember the name of the organization here, the Historic Commission here in Annapolis, having them review and comment on design. So that relatively speaking, that moved pretty quickly, and we had the design finished at some point in the fall, and then we started working on the final terms of the pre-development agreement, which talks about the process and how we were going to finish off the process. That took a few weeks, and then we started pushing for this concession agreement. And I think what everybody was lamenting about was the concession agreement, which has been the recent, very important part of this deal. And we started pushing for it in November. We finally got it Christmas Eve, but if you ask me, it was probably 75% holes. It looked more like an outline than a drafted agreement. So we went back and said, no, there's so many holes in here. And all this time, it's not just us at the table. I told you, we have experts helping us, CBRE, and others that are sitting with us. Eileen, Nate Bettenham has helped us in some respects. And that doesn't include the engineering people that are working on the design aspect of this. We've been, since that time, we've been constantly meeting with them back and forth, trying to fill in the gaps in the agreement. And at the point we were ready to go with the resolution, it was fairly finished. I don't know if I could characterize it 98% finished. There are still some issues that we're working out with them. We're trying to improve the terms still and make sure we nail down the final agreement. And that's not done yet. We're now waiting for them to respond, and we expect that any time. And it's just been a constant back and forth with us. So this concession agreement is very complicated. It's the crux of the whole deal. It's what sets up the finances. It's the borrowing terms, parking, how much they can borrow. And they at the, I don't remember when it was, February, they came back with a scenario that gave us a higher concession payment, kind of restructured the borrowing a bit to be able to get some more cash for City Dock. It's not that anything was, we were working on a confidential agreement with a private partner. And, we're trying to keep the, here's my expression. We got a lot of cooks in this kitchen cooking this, and it's getting really complicated, and adding more to that process would have been very complicated. I'll just say that. But, the involvement, AMRP, this deal with the AMRP has been going on for a year now. And it's been public information. So at any time during that process, we've been giving the FAQ updates. I don't know when it became a part of the regular agenda, but we have been providing updates regularly. It's just the concession agreements, the recent part, that's been a little stressful and hurried. It's what's giving you the idea that we're hurried, but it's just the tail end of the process is very complicated. And there are moving parts because they can't move forward with the financing until they have at least a resolution saying that the city's going to go forward with it. And it's like that. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? What do you do first? And so they can't finalize the terms of the borrowing until they get our consensus on the agreement. So we've tried to work out those details too about what takes effect when, different closing dates, financial closing, agreement closing, that kind of thing. So it's more complicated than I can get into here because even I don't have all the details of the the arrangements in my head.
Jody, thank you. Bob?
At the end of the day, this agreement could not have gone forward without the approval of the city council in the form of a resolution, as I understand it. So at the end of the day, the city council, is charged with the ultimate responsibility when it comes to the financial transactions, that this, of this complexity that the city enters into. I hear the concern about time constraints and this and that, but at what point do time constraints have to give way to what is financially sound and correct for the city? As I observed the finance committee meeting, I paid particularly close attention to the mayor's comments leading into the meeting and how he felt about this. And I know he's very strongly supportive of it. But nonetheless, this whole process, from my perspective, has a lot of serious issues in it and is somewhat problematic, as has been expressed in our conversation this morning about this. And I just go back to that, that scenario I painted of dominoes, because quite frankly, if any part of this agreement is flawed or gets into a problem area, it's going to start those dominoes falling. And we're not talking thousands of dollars. We're not talking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. We're talking about, a significant tens of millions of dollars, they're going to be involved in this, that's going to impact this city, over a lengthy period of time and significantly impact two projects where the city is going to give up 30 years of parking revenues, on this garage, in return for a concession payment that's not fully going to meet the need of what needs to be done on city dock. And giving up that those parking receipts are going to impact the city budget as well, in one form or another, as yet to be determined, and if there is an opportunity to put the pause button, to push the pause button on this, I would strongly encourage that the city council look at what is available to them to push that pause button and to take a closer look at this to be sure, as reasonably assured as possible that that the risks that are being taken are calculated risks and that we are fully aware of the various possible scenarios that could play out, and that the decision that the city council makes on this particular matter has taken into consideration those scenarios and feels that the risk is acceptable going forward. And at this point, I don't have the confidence that that has been done. So if the pause button is there, I would strongly encourage that someone push it and do what needs to be, done to give everybody the confidence necessary to move forward on this.
Thank you. Alderwoman Tierney.
I just want to say that, frankly, I think I hear Bob, and he knows I hear him. I think it's too late, but I do recommend that you painfully watch the city council meeting where I really drilled down to the risk. And we did get a statement, from the city attorney about covering the risk. That's all I could do. I mean, that's all, my hands were tied as far as any language in the contracts, even though in the outline, they told us where the risk was carried. I stress, look, I've been on the other side of this where someone defaults and where does that risk then go? And the city attorney did say that the city did not have the risk. And so therefore I withdrew my amendment, which my amendment was subject to the respective contract being executed, but that wasn't, I was told that was not legal because I didn't have that authority to get privy to a city contract. So I just think that their hands were tied, Bob, and that was the best that we could get out of it, or at least I thought so.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Arnett. And then I'd like to start to bring this to closure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to something that the finance director pointed out. In our form of government, the mayor is the chief executive officer, and he or she has the sole power to sign these kinds of agreements. The administration went out of its way to, as much as it could, include the city council, mostly in closed sessions. But really, the only power that we had was by resolution to give the sense of the council that it was better to proceed with a 3P kind of operation than to try to do two bond issuances where we financed and ran this project ourselves. I listened to Davenport, our financial advisors, and I listened to all of the other experts, which I think the city wisely brought in a lot of high-powered, good experts. And I was convinced that we could not. It's not that we should do the 3P, it's that we could not do the financing on our own. And it would not only be a huge increase in our debt burden, an impact on our bond rating, which would impact not only this project, but every year when we need to borrow $3 million, for example, to repave streets. And so we were going to be driving all of those things up. And I think that really was the only role left to the council, was which path do we take? And listening to the experts, it seemed to me that the 3P path was the path. I was struck by the comment from the CBRE that this is more and more the route that municipalities have to take, because these projects are so big, even for a city that is relatively mid-sized and wealthy like the city of Annapolis. They are bigger than we can manage ourselves. And particularly when you have two of them coming right on top of each other. And I do think they really need to be on top of each other. So I hear what you're saying. And as I said, I definitely am going to go back and look at the legislation for the fact. I'd like to go back and look at the legislation for who approves contracts about what amount, but that's a bigger lift. But I hear what you're saying, and I'm definitely going to take up that responsibility to look at the legislation for the fact.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Arnett. I'd like to bring this to a close, but I just have one substantive question, Jody, and you may not know the answer to this. I did not see the answer in looking over the 6-page fact sheet or overview, and that is, what happens, or will there be any security interest in the garage property in the event that the concessionaire defaults on its financial obligations under its debt? What are the remedies to the debt holder? In other words, even though there's non-recourse to the city in terms of full faith and credit of the city is not pledged for repayment of the debt, is there a security interest in the property itself in favor of the bondholders, or is somebody else?
So no, because title's not transferring and it's not a lease. They're just operating the garage. They're going to do the construction and operate the garage. There's no transfer of title. They can't pledge our property against any kind of borrowing. They pledged, the revenues are pledged. And if right now, as they project, we'll get a waterfall of revenues to the city, because the revenues are projected to exceed debt service. If that weren't to happen and revenues fell short, we're the bottom of the waterfall. That gets paid debt service, operating expenses and debt service first. And if all in all, the amount of parking revenue that was coming in fell short of being able to pay debt service, there's some debt service reserves. They're not huge, but they would. It's the developer's debt, and if they defaulted, if their revenues were continually short of being able to pay the debt, that would be something significant that would happen. Then the developer would default in the debt, and there's no burden for the city to pay that debt. It's not our debt.
All right, thank you.
But they do have the claim on the revenues for the time frame of the debt, which is what the whole deal is relying on. They've got a substantial debt service coverage ratio with the revenues compared to the debt service. And so, you know, that the lender, the underwriter has to be content that the revenue flow will back up the debt.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think good, healthy, substantive discussion. Just, you know, stay tuned, as they say. We'll see what happens from here. We have 2 items, unfinished business, pension and retirement benefits review. As we said, sent the letter to the city council, and city manager, I believe, said, you know, they're in the process of getting bids or quotes for doing some of the study work that would be needed. So I think that's the update on that. Spending affordability subcommittee, in talking with Bob before the meeting, he expects to bring the report, or hopes to bring the report back to the commission at the April meeting. Correct, Bob?
Yeah, that's correct. As I mentioned, and I have spoken with Ross and I have spoken with Ed, you know, we are trying to line up some type of phone conversation with some of the resource partners that would be providing data to just get a feel for the type of data that they could provide and what the costs would be involved. As I said, that there has been some at least outreach to the county, which needs to be followed up on, but would like to get this done as quickly as possible going forward. So,
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Ed, did you want to add anything?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Appreciate all your work on it. I don't have any new business. Anybody have any new business? Nope, hearing none. Next meeting, April 14th, 8 a.m. video conference, same format. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, thank you all for a very good, healthy discussion today. And I will prepare a draft communication to the city manager on the collective bargaining issue, and I'll get it out to commission members for review and comment. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to adjourn? Oh, Frank, that's right. Frank, Jim second.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.